I like to think big picture. And to me, when we're talking about a heavy day in particular, I think less is more. That's generally the theme. But I'll extend that to just about any class that you're going to teach. And again, I think this chasing volume tends to mask non-existent coaching. I wouldn't even say poor coaching. But when you have so many things to do within the span of a 1-hour session, what ends up happening is you're just kind of goalkeeping the timer. You're just really trying to manage people in a way that keeps you on track so that you can get to the next thing, so that you can get to the next class and that everything runs on time. And that's great. That's definitely an aspect of teaching a successful session. But if that's the only and most important goal, you're missing so much opportunity to connect with your athletes and to truly develop them.
Welcome to the Best Hour of Your Day podcast. This is your host, Felix, and in this podcast, I am interviewing CrossFitters and experts from around the world. On this episode, I have Adrian Bozman back on the show, and together we talk about the importance of heavy days, why they are important, and how to implement them properly into your training. At the end of the episode, we also talk about the CrossFit Games and its most memorable moments and why the CrossFit Games are moving to Texas. So stay tuned and enjoy this conversation with Adrian Bozman. It's the second time we speak, and the first time was so much fun, and we already talked about programming the CrossFit Games, and at the end of the episode, we talked about what you expect for the games, and for today's episode, I would really love to talk about what really happened there, and maybe if all went like you expected it to be, or if something probably messed up or something unexpected happened. And at the end, I also want to talk with you about heavy days, because that's one of the topics I get so many questions and from the members and from the community, and it's always like the same questions. Why do we need to do heavy days? Why do we have to rest 3 minutes in between sets? And why don't we do workouts after we lift heavy? And why can't we lift heavy every day? And I think it's probably the same questions which you get all the time. And I think it's very important to hear some answers from someone who can be trusted with his knowledge. So it would be an honor to talk about that with you.
I would be happy to. Yeah, I don't know how trustworthy I am. I'd like to think like relatively, but yes, happy to weigh in on that topic. And it's funny because, I've been doing CrossFit for a while now, and that's something that question has come up over the years again and again and again. And I'm sure it'll continue to come up as new people get involved, and, things tend to happen in cycles. So yes, that's one of the things that I think if you're involved in this in any way, coaching, programming, affiliate owner, just get comfortable with that question because it will keep coming.
Okay, maybe we start with the heavy day and maybe we continue with the games afterwards.
Oh, happy to do that, yeah.
One of the questions I get all the time is, can I be strong and build muscle without really lifting heavy weights? What would you say to that person?
I would say yes as a short answer, but you're going to be limiting where you could be strong and how you can be strong. So are there absolutely gymnasts, bodyweight athletes that are ridiculously strong? Yes, there's no question about it. But are they missing some skills that are easily developed with, a barbell or a few dumbbells? I would also argue yes. And so I think that if you're really interested in the general physical preparation that CrossFit has to offer, then why would you want to knowingly pass up something that is going to be relatively easy? Meaning, if you don't have a lot of barbell experience, you're not a particularly strength-based athlete, it's not going to take much to drive the needle forward in a pretty significant way. So why would you give that up if you knew that it wasn't going to take a huge investment of time and effort and you'd have a pretty significant return?
One of the questions that mostly girls ask is, when I lift heavy weights, do I look like I lift heavy weights in 2 weeks?
I've been trying for years, decades now. I am testament to the fact that no, you're not going to look like a behemoth just because you touched a barbell. And it is interesting how people will hold up the most extreme example of an individual and say, well, I don't want to end up, looking like that. Somebody who may be a professional athlete or who's taken the time to knowingly try to put on mass and size, and they hold that up as their day one example of what they are in fear of. And you think, man, the time and the dedication and the amount of discipline that it took to get to that point, I guess it's just ignorance that they don't understand how much has gone into that. But it is kind of a funny comparison that people think it's. And, there's all sorts of funny analogies that float around about that as well, too. It's like, oh, I just started saving money. I don't want to get too rich. It's like, it doesn't just happen, I started cooking meals at home. I don't want to become a professional chef. Like, yeah, it's not going to happen. It's a very different end state, even though the action might feel similar. So I get it. I understand, people don't want to, progress too far down something that they don't find appealing, fine. But the chances of that happening accidentally are almost none.
I don't know how you experienced that, but a lot of girls who start CrossFit, working out in a CrossFit box, at my box especially, in the beginning they say, I don't like this barbell thing. I just want to do the cardio. And after a few months, they're completely in love, and they love to lift weights, and they feel like they're getting stronger, and they can apply to everything in their just regular day. Did you experience a lot of that?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, I think that's true around the world in almost every culture and every CrossFit gym, is that you have women in particular that may have a little hesitation around lifting. And then once they get into it, they realize how much fun it can be, and B, how beneficial it can be. And yeah, you see a huge mental shift the majority of the time. Not always, but it does happen pretty regularly. And what I've observed as kind of an offshoot of that, not necessarily just with lifting, but if we take that one step further and think about just being a more physical person in general, I've seen people really come out of their shell as far as confidence level, what they want out of their life. The impact can be pretty profound beyond just what they can do and their numbers in the gym. So that, I think, is one of the coolest things as a coach to experience, is that process. And so I guess if we boil it back down a little more philosophically to, you're having this conversation with a member on day one and they say, hey, I'm a little bit intimidated about lifting. I'm not sure if it's for me. Don't fear that conversation, and don't get jaded or cynical about that if you have a lot of experience and, I've heard this before. Oh, you're going to be fine. Meet that person where they are and understand that it might take a little bit of time to get them comfortable. But it is worth that process, and it is kind of worth doing that in a way that they aren't going to get turned off by that process. Because I do think it has a very significant potential to be very impactful for their life.
Do you think everyone needs to lift heavy? I mean, it's probably like a similar question that I asked you in the beginning, but is there like a minimum age for people to start working out to lift weights, or a maximum weight? What would you say?
Well, I think heavy has to be relative. If we're talking anything with a barbell, then yeah, I think it's an all ages activity. If we're talking about trying to set a lifetime PR, well, it depends. I think that really has a lot to do with training age of the individual. I think it has a lot to do with their injury history. There's other factors to consider when we're talking about best lift I've ever done in my life, and that is how we're looking at heavy. If we're talking about just training with some resistance, though, I think that absolutely should be a part of everybody's experience. Young, old, doesn't matter. And I would argue that particularly on the older side of the scale, that's where people need it the most. And that's probably where there's the least amount of willingness to engage in the activity. But we've seen this time and time again. I've experienced this firsthand with clients that I've had. I've heard many, many anecdotes of others where you have an older client and they start working out a little bit more. They start strength training, as part of their regular kind of CrossFit training. And they go in for a physical exam, and the doctor says, wait, what are you doing? Like, your lean body mass is better, your bone density is improved. There's all of these benefits from an activity that's not usually thought of as a go-to for an aging population. But, I think now, depending on who you listen to and what you're following on the internet, you can find all of these kind of meta-analysis of age-related kind of illness and problems and mortality. And one of the common factors is, how much muscle are you carrying into your later decades? And those with, really, really poor muscle mass tend to be more susceptible to all-cause mortality. And, that right there should be an indicator that it's something that everybody should be participating in, particularly those that haven't done it much and are getting older, in my opinion.
What do you think about the other side of the spectrum? For example, I see Jason Khalipa regularly works out with his kids, which I really like, and it's like he's a big role model. But I think there are a lot of voices which say, "Oh, they're too young; they should not lift weights." And what is he doing with his kids and stuff like that? What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's really interesting to me how people frame things in such black and white terms. And so they'll look at a younger athlete with a barbell in their hands and they'll say, oh, this is absolutely dangerous. But they'll think nothing of putting them in a gymnastics program. And, you look at the forces that the joints are exposed to during some of these high velocity hanging skills or, the landing after a dismount. I mean, the forces that the body experiences in those moments is massive. And yet that doesn't really seem to raise an eyebrow because it's more traditionally understood and accepted. And you can see that in many, many other sports. I mean, in the United States, football is huge. People don't think anything about kids playing football. And the forces and stresses that the body's going to experience during that, it's massive. But when they do a set of box jumps, people can't seem to get their head around that. So it is interesting to me how people tend to cherry pick what activity seems to be, appropriate or not. All that to say, I'm very much of the opinion that there's no rush when you're working with younger athletes. And what I mean by that is, again, I personally don't feel that finding, your max at age 11 is really that significant or important, because that athlete is going to change so much year to year, just as they continue to mature and develop physically. So to me, I think they're useful tools, but I don't think all tools have to be used the same way that you might with a more experienced athlete. I think a lot of the hand-wringing is really unfortunate because all it does is it just stifles what could be a really healthy building of a relationship with a physical outlet, and really doesn't serve anybody, in my opinion. So I think that, like all things, you have to engage with it intelligently, but the benefit in my eyes far outweighs any sort of risk. And again, I think that risk, if you really are being honest about that analysis, there's risk involved in anything physical. And I would also argue that the benefit is going to outweigh it significantly, especially with a young athlete. I mean, come on, kids need to be active. They need to have a good relationship with their physical body and what it can do. And to, I don't know, build fear into that early just seems like not a good idea, in my opinion.
Okay, now we talked about that lifting heavy relatively is important for all sorts of populations. Now let's talk about why so many gyms out there, they don't really implement it correctly, like lifting heavy as a part of a regular routine. What do you think is the problem there? I mean, the CrossFit programming is a big fan of lifting heavy once in a while, not every day, but doing a heavy day and just for the sake of lifting heavy and not workout plus heavy day on the same day. Why do you think so many gyms think that they need more volume for their clients? Why do they have heavy days every day and mix it up with workouts and what else you see out there?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of well-meaning intention behind some of those strategies. And I think there's a few things going on. Number one, sometimes I feel like less experienced coaches and affiliate owners can kind of outsource their programming to the, desires of their clients and athletes. And so what I mean by that is, okay, this is what people want, therefore that's what I'm going to program, not necessarily what is best for them or what I think with my expertise is going to develop them the most. And a little bit of that is okay because you have to have people that want to come back to the gym day after day. That's of primary importance. You know, if you can't build consistency and people are not interested and therefore not consistent, that's a big problem. But I think you can absolutely go too far in that direction and start catering towards what people want at the expense of what is going to be best for them. So I think that can happen in some scenarios. I think broadly, there is a bit of immaturity from both coaches and CrossFit athletes when it comes to certain types of development. And so, in my opinion, strength and skill in other domains can be looked at as kind of an analog when you look at how you will develop them optimally. So, for example, you know, most CrossFitters, they have this in their head that if they're not tired, they're not out of breath, that the stimulus is somehow lacking. And that, by extension, trickles into their weightlifting. Well, I need to lift every minute on the minute, or I need to lift and then have something in the rest periods. Otherwise, I'm not getting a quote-unquote workout. But again, you look at any sort of skill development, and you're not going to see that same approach being taken. If somebody were coming to you and saying, okay, I want to learn how to do, I don't know, let's say a backflip. The right approach to that for somebody who's never done a backflip before is not to say, all right, we're going to start the clock. We're going to do one on the minute every minute until you nail it. That would be nonsense. People would, you know, they'd look at you like you had two heads if that was your approach to teaching somebody a backflip on the first day. There's an understanding that you're going to do a rep. You're going to do some build-up drills. You're going to talk about it a little bit. The athlete's going to have to think it through. They're going to have to make some adjustments. There's time in between this so that things can settle, and then you go again. It's no different when we're talking about strength adaptations. You know, you need some time to reset and give your best effort. And so I do think that coaches sometimes misunderstand that, and certainly athletes misunderstand that, and that's fine. You know, athletes, they, by their nature, are there expecting guidance from their coaches and affiliate owners and things like that. And so, you know, if they have the wrong impression, it's on us to kind of educate them and let them know, like, hey, this is part of the way we're going to develop best, is to take a little bit more time. The goal here is not to be out of breath. You know, enjoy that, because there's certainly days where you don't get your breath and there is no time. So that variance can be a really nice kind of mental break as well. And so developing a comfort with that, I think, is really important, not just for strength training, but for all of these other things that you would hopefully want to develop, you know, different skills and different activities. Yeah, so I think those two factors are probably the most significant. You have coaches that want to cater a little bit more towards what their athletes want, or at least what they think they want, and then a little bit of immaturity for people understanding that certain attributes are going to be developed best without being completely out of breath and exhausted.
So I'm a really big fan of the CrossFit affiliate programming. We use it at our box for the last few months, and I think the development of our athletes is really great, and they're having a lot of fun. Sometimes I see other programs and the volume of the programs is just ridiculously high. Do you think maybe that's a problem, that there are so many different online trainings out there, which, for example, a not so experienced coach uses and then doesn't know anything about the implementation, just uses the program? And maybe he gets a little bit drawn into, because he thinks, okay, a programmer might know what he's doing. I just use it without thinking about it.
That's a good question. I don't think it's a problem. I'm a big fan of how many different outlets there are right now that offer programming. I think it's really healthy that there's so many of them. Now, I do recognize that can make it a little confusing for people, because it's like, well, how do you choose? And so if we're looking at it through the lens of a coach or an affiliate owner that, you know, they don't have time to program, or they don't want to program, or maybe they just know that somebody's more experienced than them, so they choose something to free up that time to better focus on other aspects of their affiliate. Hey, great. I think that's really great that they have that opportunity. However, it's still their job to take a look at the effect of that program once it's taken place. And so whether you're doing your own program or somebody else's, at a certain point, regularly, you need to take a look and say, okay, what's happening broadly with my population? Are they generally getting fitter? Meaning, can I see when we come back and test some of these benchmarks that they are doing better? Can they do more reps of certain movements that they were struggling with in the past? Things of that nature should be moving in the right direction. Additionally, you should be looking at some kind of non-tangible or intangible elements like participation. What's the attendance been like since we've implemented this? Is it moving in the right direction? Is it about the same? Are people showing up less than they were before? Injury rate in general, again, you should be monitoring kind of, okay, who's in the gym regularly, who's had to step away. And even if it's something, relatively insignificant, like they've just developed a little bit of, tendonitis or something, that it's not a really significant injury. There wasn't like an acute moment, but they just are having a harder time getting in and getting through the program. Those are little things that you want to pick up on. And if you're seeing a collection of these type of factors trending in a negative way, well, then you have to ask why. And one of the most obvious places to start looking is, okay, well, what was different from this program that we've implemented now to what we were doing in the past? And, if the volume is significantly different, to me, that's probably a pretty big indicator that it's too much for the group you're working with. And again, I come back to this idea of a more mature coach and athlete. Some lessons you have to learn by going through the process. You and I may be able to sit here and say, hey, I think that might not be the best path. But unfortunately, some people just have to walk that path before they understand. I know I did. I mean, I had to go through some time in my younger days where I was convinced that I had to try to keep up my training volume with people around me. And, honestly, I didn't enjoy it at that time. And that was one of the things I noticed the most was, it's like, man, I feel obligated to train instead of I feel like I enjoy training and it's something that I want to do. And that to me was, once I realized that, it was like, oh, wow, that's a very big mental shift to feel like I have to be doing this rather than, oh, I want to be doing this and I see the benefit of doing this. It's a very different mindset. And that came about from me personally feeling like I had to chase this kind of, volume thing. And I'm rambling a little bit here, but I think a lot of that comes down to, again, a strong understanding of the affiliate owner and the coach, recognizing that not all people are going to train for the same reasons. And yeah, you're certainly going to have some people within the affiliate that train so that they can train more because that's all they want to do and they love it and they want to compete on the weekends. And this is what they want to do. Great. For those people, okay, that's fine. If they want to dabble in that world for a while, no problem. But for most of us, I don't think that's the reality. I think the reality is training is fun. It helps to enrich your life. It's social time with a group of people that also want to see you get better. And the dose for that to be effective is way lower than what most people really think it needs to be, at least in my experience. You can get away with a relatively minimalist program and still reap a ton of benefit. And so for people that are in that bucket, which I would argue is the majority of the people in the affiliate, I think you're much better served to be a little more conservative with what you're offering them.
Let's assume we have an affiliate owner who knows the value of the strength training and the heavy days. How does he or she program a heavy day correctly? So there's a nice guide in the level 1, I think, where it describes how to program a heavy day, how it's set up and how you program a warm up and maybe some stretching and a cool down. But how would you tell someone to program a heavy day that it's fun, that's entertaining, and that's effective and safe, of course?
Yeah, I had to throw that one in there too. Fun, effective, and dangerous. Who knows? Maybe if you market it that way, you get more people in the door. Little danger in their lives. Excuse me 1 second. I gotta clear my throat. Okay. Well, I think this Again, I like to think big picture. And to me, when we're talking about a heavy day in particular, I think less is more. That's generally the theme. But I'll extend that to just about any class that you're going to teach. And again, I think this chasing volume approach, it tends to mask non-existent coaching. I wouldn't even say poor coaching. But when you have so many things to do within the span of a 1-hour session, what ends up happening is you're just kind of goalkeeping the timer. You're just really trying to manage people in a way that keeps you on track, so that you can get to the next thing, so that you can get to the next class, and that everything runs on time. And that's great. That's definitely an aspect of teaching a successful session. But if that's the only and most important goal, you're missing so much opportunity to connect with your athletes and to truly develop them. There needs to be some time built in within that is open for those interactions, for people to explore the movements, and particularly so on a heavy day. So first of all, it's going to start with a warm-up that allows people to ramp up to something that is significant as far as the load that they're going to lift. And then I think the selection of what you're going to do is important. It should be probably less than you think, 1 or 2 movements, 3 to 5 sets, lots of time in between. And one of my favorite things to do to kind of sneak in some work, if people feel that they need that, is to pick an opposing movement, particularly like a body weight movement, and do it for reps and make that more of a development day with that movement. So for example, maybe you're doing push jerks. And, this is something that I did with the main site recently when I had the opportunity to program a few workouts there. It was an overhead lifting day, but to get a little bit more work in and to satisfy some of these volume junkies, it's like, okay, between sets, we're going to experiment with some L-sit pull-ups, which you never see anywhere else. And people aren't really going to want to see that in a more conditioning-focused workout. So that's a great opportunity to put them in there and say, okay, this is part of our strength training today. We get some heavy sets in with the barbell, and we flip-flop with a different movement that you might not see regularly, but is still important to work on. So that's kind of a fun way that you could do that. But at the end of the day, it's a less is more approach. Recognize and build it in, and start educating people on the fact that, we're going to come into each one of these sets feeling basically fully rested. And that's exactly what we want, so that you can focus on the execution of the lift and best effort within it. A couple of ways to do that on a practical level. One of my favorite things to do is really direct the group, in the sense that you put them in little groups. So, partners, or even better, a group of 3, have them work in that rotation so that it forces a little bit of rest. No matter how fast you're moving, you have to wait until you've loaded and unloaded, watched your partner's lift, comes back around to you. Just little things like that can really facilitate this idea that there is going to be time in between, and that's exactly what's supposed to happen. I've seen other coaches that use a clock really successfully within that. So you've got a group of 3, for example, say, okay, lifter 1 is going to lift at the first minute, lifter 2 on the second minute, lifter 3 on the third minute. We've got a nice built-in rest that really helps out. And, people in that scenario feel like they aren't doing anything wrong, quote unquote, by taking that time, because you've told them that it's appropriate. So, I guess all that to say, have a plan going into that work that will seem a little bit sparse, that helps to convince the athlete that it's exactly what they're supposed to be doing. And then if you do have some time at the end of the session, again, I'm a huge fan of coupling strength work with some skill development. So pick a skill. It doesn't even have to be related necessarily to what you lifted, and use that time and that same kind of feeling to work some skills, because the mindset is already that we're going to take some time between sets. We're going to focus on execution. That lends itself so well to other skills. You might as well capitalize on that mindset and ride that session out.
Yeah, I think there was like last week or 2 weeks ago where there was a 400-meter run, all out, max effort, and it was combined with some muscle-up transition drills.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, that was really cool, actually. The people, they enjoyed it. They got a a nice sweat with the run, which is basically, I would say running 400 meters all out is also some kind of 1 rep max.
Sure. Yes, very similar. Yeah.
Yeah. So the combination was really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that kind of thing. But again, if I have to come back to the big picture, I think it's convincing athletes that yes, there will absolutely be a lot of days that you come in, you're out of breath, there's no time, rest is minimal. That's an important way to train. Equally as important are the days that you come in, you have time, you really focus on that singular execution. You come into each opportunity to work fresh, and that's an important way to train too.
So when we switch topics a little bit, we stick to the strength aspect, because when I look at the CrossFit Games and I see the athletes competing from year to year, they get stronger every year. That's so impressive.
Yeah.
Does their volume has changed during the last 5 or 10 years?
That's a good question. As far as the competition expectation at the games, it's remained relatively steady. I mean, it kind of goes up and down a little bit over the years. I know I can't remember the year, 2021 maybe, I think was the highest number of events that they ever experienced in a competition was 15, or at least at the CrossFit Games. I can't speak to some of the other competitions out there. And that was kind of a historic high for the CrossFit Games. So as far as the volume that they're expected to perform there, it hasn't changed significantly. It'll kind of fluctuate up and down a little bit. As far as the volume that they use in their training to be prepared for that, it definitely seems that most athletes have crept up over the years. Now, what I think is kind of interesting is that you're seeing some athletes start to shy away from that. It's almost, we were talking earlier that things tend to happen in cycles, and I think this is no different. What I'm observing is that, there are absolutely some high-level competitors that's what they do. Tons of volume, lots of sessions every day. But there are a few that have kind of moved towards that model, tried it out, and then recognized that it didn't work for them, and they've stepped away. They might be a little bit less vocal about that. And I think there's some weird kind of psychology that goes in, because you don't want to admit to your competitors that maybe you're training less than them. But I've definitely seen that, where there are athletes that have recognized that all volume all the time is not the way to optimize for them, even if it may be what it appears like for some other athletes.
So in our last episode, we talked about your expectation for the games, who might win the games, what probably happens there. Did the games hold up to your expectations?
Oh, yes, in the sense that, I don't have a lot of specific expectations. I've talked about this a little bit in the past, but I'm not particularly interested in trying to craft an outcome or even predict that outcome, more than just like I'm a fan at heart and it's fun to talk about. But what I think is really important for me and the team that's responsible for the games is to just craft a container or set the table, whatever analogy you want to use, that allows the athletes to showcase the breadth of their abilities. And so in that regard, I think it went off just as I expected. We had some athletes that were able to really show their range. I mean, Jeffrey Adler was a great example. Particularly on Saturday, I think it was such a standout day for him to be able to run that fast in the morning, lift that heavy at night, and then, complete that conditioning workout in the middle. That's a day of programming that anybody could do at their level. And just to see the difference between what the highest level of achievement is for those guys versus what the average person is capable of, it's pretty amazing. So in that regard, I didn't get surprised by a lot. There were a few things that, maybe didn't play out exactly as expected. There was the first team workout. It was a bit of a repeat of a workout that got rained out in 2022. And the reps that we had established for that, we thought more teams would complete it. Turns out no teams completed it, so that was a little bit of a miss on our part. At the end of the day, they all competed with the same test, and it worked out, but it would have been nice to hit that number a little bit more accurately. On the women's side, there was the ski bag event, and we used 125-pound sandbags, so just under 60K. And it's funny, when we released that, we got some messages from some athletes that said, oh, how come it wasn't heavier? How come it wasn't the more traditional 150-pound bag? And then when it came time to execute, a lot fewer of the field finished that than we expected. And I think that they expected. Otherwise, they probably wouldn't have been sending us those messages. So that was kind of interesting to see. I don't know if that was just a fatigue factor or where it fell on the weekend. Because when we tested it, we were pretty confident that it was going to play out similar to the men's. So little things like that. But overall, no, it played out pretty close to what I was expecting.
Is there a specific reason that there was no swimming event this year?
No, I mean, there were some logistic considerations as far as, what we wanted to do with offsite events. This year there was a real concerted effort to keep things on campus. We've gotten some feedback in the past that I think is legitimate, where people say, hey, we've showed up and we haven't been able to see certain things, or we weren't expecting to have to be offsite. And I think there's a hardcore argument there that says, well, the games always have offsites, so you should expect to be offsite, sure. But we wanted to challenge ourselves a little bit and say, all right, can we keep things contained and use the canvas that we have within the venue? And so that was one of the decisions that went into that. And the second decision is that, hey, not all things have to be present at all games. And swimming has been a staple. I think swimming as a developmental tool is still valuable for people to train, even if they don't see it in competition. And so, yeah, you might not see it every year. And this is one of those years. And it's funny because, this is, again, something we've seen time and time again through games history. Whether it appears or doesn't, people want to use that as some sort of training bedrock. So, for example, in 2008, when we did chest to bar Fran, all of a sudden people are like, oh, we're never going to do a regular pull-up again. It's only chest to bar from here on out. And you're like, well, that's kind of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, right? And so it's the same thing, I think, with swimming, with it not being included. People are like, oh, maybe I'll de-emphasize swimming in my training. So, well, that may be a mistake for the future.
Is there a specific workout which you like the most after the completion of the workouts?
I wouldn't say that there's a single favorite. There's ones that I really liked. It was really fun to be able to do the alpaca because we got rained out in 22 and we got to do it the way it was intended in 23. It was a very, very different experience, I think, for the athletes. That was fun to watch, and a very difficult event. So interesting to see how much spread there was between the people that were really able to complete that and the people that absolutely got stopped by it. So I like that. But I guess the short answer is that I like so many of the events for different reasons. And now that I've seen the games and they've come and gone, it's like you have these little moments with each one of them that it's hard to pick a favorite because there's so many great moments that happen. But yeah, I really like the pig chipper. I think that was a really fun one. The push, what do we call it? I can't remember the name of it now. It was the second to last event. Pulling power, maybe something like that.
So the parallel bar pull?
That's the one, the parallel bar pull. Yeah, that was a really fun event. I thought that combination was really interesting. And I think it surprised people how fast it was. Like that was way more of like a pedal to the metal type of event than I think most people expected. There were a lot of moments.
Was there any specific moment, like, for example, when Roman did the rope jump with one leg? It was like one of the moments that will stuck in the heads probably forever because, that's so cool, right?
Yeah, again, where to start? There's so many. Getting back to the pig chipper, I think when Laura Horvath came out, she was a little bit behind the pack getting back to the pig on the return. But as soon as she put her hands on that, it was obvious that she was just going to run away with it. So that was a pretty crazy moment to see her just enter in with full confidence and just send a message at that point, kind of extending discussion about her. Watching her lift on Saturday night was absolutely electric. The fact that she knew that she didn't have to lift that final clean and jerk to still win the event, but did it anyway, just to show what she could do. I mean, that was so cool. Jack Farlow's almost 400-pound clean and jerk. That was amazing. There's so many moments like that just, continue to impress you about the athletes. Honestly, I would say the things that stand out that are obvious, like, Roman's gutsy performance on the being injured and still deciding to come out, even though he didn't really have to, that's an obvious thing to the audience. But part of the thing that makes the game so rich is that there's so many other little moments within each of these events that if you're a fan, you can go back and kind of pick them out. And I really encourage people to do that. Don't look for the big grandiose things. Look for the small things, because within each event, there's plenty of that. And you can kind of learn to pick up on it. You can see the competitors being competitors. They look left and right. They see what they have to do to win. You can see the opposite of that too, where people are out in front and they let it go. They can tell that they just don't have it. And so you can see the decision that they make almost to say, all right, this person's going to pass me and there's nothing I can do about it. That kind of thing, I think, is really kind of the essence of sport. And that's what makes the game so compelling to me.
So a few days or maybe some weeks ago, there was this big announcement that the games, they're moving to Texas. Why is that?
That's just a really simple question. I like that. Well, I don't want to talk too much about the move. But what I will say is, we've been in Madison since 2017, so a lot of years. We'd been in Carson from 2010 to 2016 was our final year there. And then obviously Aromas before that. It was time, more than anything else. We needed to change things up. I think everybody knew that we were looking. There was all the news that we were apparently going to Birmingham, Alabama before that. So I think people knew that we were planning to move the games in the next few years. And Fort Worth just made sense. It's very central in the United States. Internationally, it's easy to get to. They have an amazing venue. The venue, it'll be the most modern venue that the Games has ever been in. The stadium is only 4 years old. So it's an absolutely incredible place to host the event. And so it'll afford us a lot of new opportunities. And every venue that you go to, it has its own character, its own flavor, and that kind of informs what you can do with the competition. So it's exciting to kind of look at things with a fresh perspective and say, okay, what can we do with this venue to really make it unique? It should be a lot of fun.
Is there anything specific in your head what you already thought about? What this venue will be an opportunity to program specific events or whatnot?
Absolutely. We went there. I'm trying to think now. It was probably, I'm looking at my calendar here behind me, end of August, early September. We went there for just kind of one of the final site visits to familiarize some of our team with the venue before things got a little too public. And yes, there are already some ideas, some pictures being taken, some crafting going on there with some of the features around and in that venue. So can't talk too much about the detail there, but it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, it's gotta be awesome. I think all the changes in the past years always made the games a little bit better, a little bit more professional, and I think that will happen again next year.
Yeah, me too. And we're trying. I think it's a tricky thing because for a sport that is so based around variance and resilience to change and that sort of thing, people sometimes have a difficult time with change. And I understand that. I get it. People want to know how they're going to compete, what the competition is going to look like. They want that kind of familiarity. But at a certain point, you have to understand the sport is about change, and inevitably it will. And that's a good thing.
I'm really looking forward to it. And let's see what happens.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
It was such a pleasure to talk to you again, boss. And I think that probably was not the last conversation we have. I think you are a very you're one of my favorite guests. So I hope we can continue that during the next few months.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. It's always a pleasure, man. I appreciate you giving me the time, and I admire your ability to facilitate the conversation with so much space. You just allow me to ramble, and I appreciate that. So, so thank you very much.
If you like this episode, please leave us a rating on Apple or Spotify. Hear you next time.